The air on Xylos tasted of damp soil, ozone, and the sweet decay of crimson moss. It was a living scent, one Xylia had breathed since her first drawing of life. Her four lungs processed it, filtering the nuances that spoke of a coming storm in the west and the passage of a herd of thornbacks to the south. Her multifaceted eyes, shifting through shades of amber and obsidian, scanned the perpetual twilight of the jungle floor. Below the colossal, bioluminescent fungi that served as the planet's suns, shadows danced with a life of their own. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, was a word in a language she had mastered over 80 cycles of the twin moons. She was a huntress of the Kithen people, and her body was a testament to her calling. Her exoskeleton, a shimmering, chitinous armor of deep emerald, was scarred with the marks of past encounters. A long, thin line across her thorax from a razor vine's lash, a pitted divot on her shoulder where a spine leaper's quill had struck. Her primary arms were long and slender, ending in three-fingered hands that could grip the haft of her crystalline spear with unyielding strength. A smaller, secondary pair of arms, tucked beneath her main set, were reserved for fine, delicate work. Setting snares, dressing a kill, or tracing the sacred hunting glyphs upon her armor before a stalk. Today, she was not hunting. She was tracking. For 3 sun cycles, a ghost had moved through her clan's territory. It left behind signs that were both baffling and deeply unsettling. There were tracks, heavy and bipedal, but with a strange, soft-edged impression her people did not make. There were broken branches at a height that suggested a creature of immense size, yet it moved with an impossible stealth. The elders whispered of vengeful spirits, of omens. The younger hunters, full of bravado, spoke of a new beast to claim for glory. Xylia, however, felt a different kind of tremor in the world's energy field, a cold spot in the vibrant life song of the jungle. It was a silence where there should be noise, an emptiness that spoke of something utterly alien. Her quarry today was meant to be a simple glasswing, its iridescent membranes prized for ritual cloaks. But the signs of the ghost had drawn her deeper, into the shadowed vales near the weeping spires, a region few Kithen dared to tread. This was the domain of the Cathar. The name itself was a prayer and a curse. The Cathar was not merely an animal, it was a force of nature, the living embodiment of the planet's savage heart. It stood twice as tall as a Kithen warrior, a hulking mass of corded muscle, obsidian claws that could shear through stone, and a jaw capable of snapping the armored trunk of an ironwood tree. It was said that a Cathar did not bleed, but wept molten fury. Its roar could shatter the crystalline resonance of a Kithen's spear. In the whole history of her clan, spanning 1,000 cycles, only 7 Cathar had ever been brought down, and each hunt was an epic, a saga that cost the lives of dozens of the most legendary hunters. To hunt a Cathar was not a mark of skill. It was a suicidal act of devotion, undertaken only when the beast grew old and rabid, threatening the clan's existence. To even see one was to be marked by fate. Xylia moved with the silence of falling spores. Her feet, padded and clawed, made no sound on the damp moss. She found the ghost's tracks again, leading straight into the heart of the Cathar's known territory. Madness. No creature with a shred of survival instinct would do this. She followed, her mandibles clicking with a nervous rhythm she could not suppress. The air grew thick, heavy with a musky, predatory scent that made the plates of her exoskeleton tighten instinctively. It was the scent of the apex. Then she heard it, not the ground-shaking roar of a Cathar in its fury, but the sickening crack of bone, followed by a wet, tearing sound. Her blood ran cold. She crept forward, her spear held low, its crystalline tip humming with latent energy. She peered through a curtain of phosphorescent vines, her body pressed flat against the damp earth. The clearing was small, dominated by a smoldering fire pit, another alien sign, and beside it the source of the tracks. The creature was tall and strangely soft-looking, its skin a pale, unarmored pink. It had only 2 arms, and its face was a bizarrely flat landscape of features. It wore tough, dark material that covered its torso and legs, but its form was undeniably frail compared to the hardened creatures of Xylos. This was the ghost. This was the Skyfaller, the thing that had crashed in the burning plains weeks ago, an event the shamans had declared a sign of cosmic imbalance. But it was not the creature itself that held Xylia's gaze, that paralyzed her limbs and stole the air from her lungs. It was what lay at its feet, a Cathar. It was dead. Its massive head, larger than Xylia's entire torso, lay severed from its body. The ground was dark with its lifeblood, which did not glow like molten fury but was simply a deep, mundane red. There was no sign of a legendary battle. No shattered trees, no gouged earth, just the dead god and the pale creature. And then the ultimate desecration began, the soft-skinned being produced a sharp, metallic tool. With methodical, almost casual movements, it began to slice a thick steak of muscle from the Cathar's thigh. It impaled the slab of meat on a sharpened stick and held it over the fire. Xylia watched, her mind a screaming void of disbelief, as the flesh sizzled and browned. The smell that wafted toward her was a blasphemous perfume of cooked meat and burning fat. Her culture, her entire understanding of the world, was built on a foundation of respect for the hunt. You honored your kill. You thanked the spirit of the forest for its bounty. You used every part. You never ever treated a fallen creature with such utility. And a Cathar was beyond consumption. Its flesh was said to be poison, its spirit too powerful to be contained within a lesser being. To eat it was not just sacrilege, it was an act of cosmic arrogance. The creature pulled the cooked meat from the fire. It blew on it briefly, a small puff of vapor in the cool air, and then it took a bite. It chewed, its jaw working with a steady, rhythmic motion. It ate the apex predator of her world as if it were a common root tuber. Fear, cold and absolute, seized Xylia. This was not a spirit or a beast. It was something far more terrifying. This being, which looked so fragile, had slain a demigod without a struggle and was now casually eating its corpse for sustenance. What kind of power did it wield? What universe could possibly spawn a creature so utterly, terrifyingly dominant that it could treat a Cathar as simple livestock? For the first time in her life as a huntress, Xylia knew what it felt like to be prey. She lay motionless in the undergrowth, a silent witness to an act that had broken her world. The pale creature took another bite, and in the quiet clearing, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the chewing of a god-eater. For what felt like an eternity, Xylia remained frozen, hidden behind the shimmering veil of vines. Her every instinct screamed at her to flee, to put as much distance as possible between herself and the monstrous scene in the clearing. The Kithen were hunters, not cowards, but there was a vast difference between bravery and striding willingly into the maw of the incomprehensible. And this thing, this human as she would later learn it was called, was beyond her comprehension. Yet she did not move. The hunter in her, the part that was defined by observation and the patient study of prey, was captivated. After the initial wave of paralyzing fear, a new sensation began to ripple through her, a chilling, magnetic curiosity. She watched the human, this Caleb, as his own thoughts likely named him, with an intensity she usually reserved for tracking the most elusive game. He ate with a slow, deliberate pace, not with the frenzied hunger of a starving animal, but with the measured calm of someone sitting down to a routine meal. When he was finished with the slab of meat, he wiped his hands on a piece of cloth, the gesture so mundane it was utterly alien in this context. He then turned his attention to the Cathar's carcass. Xylia expected more desecration, perhaps a trophy taken from its claws or teeth. Instead, the human began a process that was shockingly familiar. With precise cuts, he began to butcher the creature. He worked with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, separating muscle from bone, harvesting organs, and carefully skinning the thick, armored hide. It was not the ritualistic process a Kithen would follow, filled with prayers and pauses of respect, but it was methodical. Nothing was wasted. He laid out strips of meat on a rack he had constructed from branches to dry. He cleaned the organs and placed them in a container. He treated the hide with a strange substance from a pouch, scraping it clean. Xylia's horror began to war with a grudging, terrifying respect. This was not the act of a mindless monster. This was the work of a survivor, a supremely capable one. He was not feasting on a god for arrogance, but processing a resource to live. The sheer pragmatism of it was more frightening than any display of rage or power could ever be. He had looked upon the most feared thing on her planet and seen not a myth, but calories, protein, and material for shelter. She stayed hidden through the cycle of darkness, watching as he tended his fire, sharpened his strange metal tools, and worked on the carcass. He moved with a quiet confidence, his posture relaxed but aware. He was alone, stranded, surrounded by a world that would kill him in 1,000 different ways, and yet he seemed content, at peace. The next light cycle, she continued her silent vigil. She saw him check snares he had set, catching a small, six-legged rodent. He dispatched it with a quick, humane twist of the neck, a gesture of efficiency that she could, on some level, understand. He wasn't cruel. He was simply a predator at the top of a food chain she hadn't known existed. Her fear was a constant thrum beneath the surface of her thoughts, but it was now threaded with other, more complex emotions. There was awe at his capabilities. There was respect for his resilience. And there was something else, something deeply unsettling she could not yet name. It was a fascination with his form, with the strange economy of his two-armed movements, with the expressions that shifted across his soft face. He would sometimes pause and look up at the giant fungi, a look of profound loneliness in his eyes that resonated with her own solitary existence as a huntress. On the third day of her watch, her presence was discovered. She had shifted her position, a slight miscalculation causing a pebble to dislodge and skitter down a rock face. It was a minuscule sound, one that most creatures on Xylos would have ignored. The human froze instantly. His head snapped up, his pale eyes scanning the exact spot where she was concealed. He didn't tense or reach for a weapon. He simply looked, his gaze penetrating, intelligent. Xylia's four lungs seized. She was caught. A master huntress, caught like a hatchling in a snare. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his knife on a rock. He raised his two empty hands, palms facing her, a gesture whose meaning she could not guess but which did not feel aggressive. He held her gaze for a long moment, then spoke. The sounds were guttural and strange, a series of noises that carried no meaning for her. "I know you're out there," he said, his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The words were gibberish, but the tone was clear. It was not a challenge. It was an invitation. Xylia's mind raced. To reveal herself was to invite death. He had killed a Cathar. What would he do to a Kithen? But to flee now would be to admit fear, to cede the encounter. More than that, the mystery of him was too strong. She had to know. Slowly, she rose from her hiding place. Her tall, emerald-chitin form unfolded from the shadows, her crystalline spear held loosely at her side, not aimed, but ready. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her multifaceted eyes taking in his reaction. The human's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. He was seeing a Kithen for the first time, just as she was truly seeing a human. He took in her four arms, her insectoid graceful posture, the shimmering exoskeleton. He did not show fear. Instead, his expression softened into one of pure, unadulterated wonder. "Incredible," he whispered, the sound barely reaching her. They stood in silence for what felt like a full turning of the moons, two predators from different stars, locked in a tableau of mutual assessment. The fear was still there, a cold knot in Xylia's belly, but it was now joined by the powerful, intoxicating pull of the unknown. She looked at the slayer of gods, and for the first time she saw not a monster but a person who was just as alone as she was. The standoff in the clearing stretched into a fragile, unspoken truce. Neither moved to attack, neither fled. Xylia remained at the tree line, a silent emerald sentinel, while the human, Caleb, slowly went back to his tasks, though his movements were now more conscious, more aware of her presence. He would occasionally glance toward her, a question in his pale eyes before returning to his work. Xylia's internal conflict was a raging tempest. Her training, her instincts, her cultural DNA, all screamed that this being was an apex threat of the highest order. He was a defiler, an unknown variable in the sacred balance of the hunt. Yet her senses told her a different story. He displayed no malice. His energy field, which she could perceive as a faint shimmer around him, was calm and steady, not spiked with the aggression she would expect from a predator sizing up its next meal. The first gesture of communication came from him. He had been roasting the meat of the small rodent he'd snared earlier. After it was cooked, he tore a piece off, placed it on a flat, clean leaf, and set it on a rock midway between them. Then he retreated back to his fire, sat down, and began to eat his own portion. pointedly turning his back to her in a display of what she could only interpret as trust, or perhaps a calculated risk. Xylia watched the offering for a long time. It could be a trick. The meat could be poisoned. It was an offering from a being who consumed gods, but his posture was non-threatening and the gesture felt genuine. Her pride warred with her caution. To accept was to engage, to step onto a path from which there might be no return. To refuse was to maintain the distance, the safety of the unknown. Driven by the curiosity that had kept her there for days, she finally made her decision. She moved with fluid grace from the shadows, her spear still in hand but pointed toward the ground. She approached the rock, her multifaceted eyes never leaving him, even as his back was turned. She picked up the leaf, the meat warm against her three-fingered hand. She retreated to the safety of the trees before examining it. It smelled simple, clean. She took a small, tentative bite. It was just meat, cooked and savory. It was not a trick. It was a gift. This simple act changed everything. It was a bridge built across an impossible chasm of biology and culture. From her new vantage point, she ate the offering, the taste foreign but not unpleasant. When she was done, she placed the clean leaf back on the same rock, a silent acknowledgement. Over the next few cycles, this became their routine. He would leave food for her and she would accept it. She, in turn, began to contribute. One day, she left a handful of sweet, energy-rich grubs on the rock. He inspected them with a look of intense curiosity, and then, to her astonishment, cooked and ate one. His face twisted in a way she couldn't quite interpret, but he finished it. The next day, she brought him a large, succulent fungus known for its purifying properties. He seemed to understand its medicinal value, rubbing some of it on a cut on his arm. They began to communicate through pantomime. He pointed to himself. "Caleb!" The sound was strange, but she tried to mimic the shape of it with her mandibles, a clicking, chittering sound that was a poor imitation. He seemed to understand and smiled. A baring of teeth that she was beginning to learn was not a threat. She pointed to herself, her hand tapping the center of her chest. "Xylia!" He repeated it, his tongue fumbling the clicks and hisses of her language, but the effort was clear. He used a small, flat object that glowed with its own light, a datapad, a piece of his Skyfall technology. On it, he showed her images. A world of towering, geometric structures that dwarfed the tallest trees on Xylos. Images of other humans, thousands of them, their soft faces a sea of variation. He showed her a picture of a smaller, furred creature that he seemed to have an affection for, and a female of his species with whom he held hands. A mate. The realization sent a strange, sharp pang through Xylia's thorax, an emotion she refused to analyze. She, in turn, tried to explain her world. She drew in the dirt with the butt of her spear. A map of the territory, the location of her clan's warren, the sacred hunting grounds. She showed him how to identify poisonous plants and how to find water. She demonstrated the way her spear's crystal could be focused to create a blinding flash of light, a tool for startling prey. He watched everything with an engineer's eye, his mind clearly dissecting the function and physics of her world with an intensity that was both flattering and unnerving. The chasm between them was slowly being filled, stone by stone, gesture by gesture. But the specter of the Cathar remained. Its partially butchered carcass was a constant, silent testament to the event that had brought them together. Xylia knew she had to address it. Her fear of him had lessened, replaced by a complex web of respect and fascination, but the fundamental question of his power remained unanswered. One evening, as the twin moons began their ascent, casting a silver and violet glow over the clearing, she gathered her courage. She walked out of the trees, not stopping at the midway rock, but continuing until she stood only a few spear lengths from his fire. Caleb looked up, his expression cautious but not alarmed. Xylia pointed with her spear, not at Caleb, but at the skull of the Cathar, which he had cleaned and set aside. Her posture was not aggressive, but deeply serious. She looked from the skull to him, and then back again, her multifaceted eyes holding a question she had no words for. "How, why?" Caleb's calm demeanor sobered, he understood. He looked at the skull, a flicker of something, regret perhaps, or just the memory of a grim necessity in his eyes. He stood up and walked toward the carcass. He beckoned for her to follow. Hesitantly, she did. He pointed to a massive, gaping wound in the Cathar's side, a wound she had not noticed before, hidden beneath a flap of hide. The flesh around it was blackened and melted. He then touched a small, metallic device on his belt. It was not a weapon in the way she understood one, not a blade or a spear. It looked like a simple tool. Through a series of gestures, he began to tell the story. He depicted the Cathar, using his hands to show its immense size and aggression. He mimed it charging him, roaring. He wasn't hunting it, it was hunting him. It had cornered him against the rocks of the clearing. He then pointed to the tool on his belt again, and then to the wound. He made a sound, a low hum followed by a sharp crackle. He was explaining that his tool, a plasma cutter for repairing his crashed pod, had been his only defense. It was a desperate, last-ditch act of survival. He hadn't overpowered the beast with brute strength or legendary skill. He had killed it with technology, with cleverness born of desperation. The revelation struck Xylia with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't a god-killer in the mythic sense. He was an intelligent, cornered animal who had used a tool she couldn't comprehend to survive an attack. The fear she held for him, the image of an all-powerful being, began to dissolve, replaced by something far more potent. He wasn't powerful because he was a monster. He was powerful because he was resourceful. He was a survivor just like her. But his tools, his methods, were born of a universe of knowledge she could barely imagine. As she processed this, a new sound intruded on the quiet of the clearing. The sharp snap of a twig, followed by the low, guttural call of a Kithen scout. Xylia's head whipped around. Her mandibles flared in alarm. At the edge of the clearing, stepping out of the shadows, were three figures. They were Kithen warriors from her clan, their emerald exoskeletons marked with the sigils of the Elder Hunt Council. Their leader, Kale, a formidable hunter whose skill was rivaled only by Xylia's own, fixed his gaze on the scene before him. He saw Xylia standing beside a creature from the sky. He saw the fire, the tools, and the butchered, desecrated remains of a Cathar. His eyes narrowed, and the ritual greeting call died in his throat. In its place came a single, sharp command to his warriors, a word that Xylia had not heard since the last great territorial war. "Blight!" Kale hissed, and the crystals of their spears began to glow with deadly intent. The air in the clearing crackled with sudden, violent tension. Kale and his two warriors advanced, their movements a synchronized dance of aggression. They fanned out, their spears held high, the crystalline tips pulsing with a dangerous, golden light. Their focus was entirely on Caleb, who had instinctively taken a step back, his hand hovering over the plasma cutter at his belt. "Kale, wait!" Xylia's voice was sharp, a command that carried the weight of her standing as a first huntress. She moved instantly, her lithe form a blur of emerald chitin, placing herself directly between the advancing Kithen and the human. "He is not what you think." Kale stopped, his multifaceted eyes narrowing to slits. He was a traditionalist, a warrior whose belief in the sanctity of the hunt and the old ways was etched into his very being. To him, the scene was one of ultimate sacrilege. "Not what I think," he snarled, the sound a low vibration from his thorax. "I see a ghost-faced scavenger feasting on the flesh of a god. I see you, Xylia, standing beside it as if in kinship. Have you lost your senses? This thing has defiled the spirit of the world." "It was survival," Xylia countered, her own spear held defensively, a barrier between her clan and her new companion. "The Cathar attacked him. He defended himself." "Defended himself?" The warrior to Kale's right, a younger Kithen named Vorl, scoffed. "With what harsh language? Look at it, Xylia, it is soft, unarmored. It is an insult to the memory of every hunter who ever fell to the Cathars might to suggest this creature could best won in a fair fight." Caleb, though he could not understand the words, could read the intent perfectly. He stood his ground, his eyes darting between Xylia and the hostile newcomers. He kept his hands visible, away from his tool, letting Xylia take the lead. It was a gesture of trust that did not go unnoticed by her. "His ways are not our ways," Xylia insisted, her voice resonating with an urgency that came from a place deeper than clan loyalty. "He did not hunt it for glory. He fought because he had no choice. He is alone here, stranded." "He is a blight," Kale repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "A festering wound from the sky. The elders were right. It is a bad omen. We must cleanse this territory. Step aside, Xylia." My quarrel is not with you, but I will not let you protect this profanity. Xylia's mandibles clicked shut. She knew Kale. She knew his stubbornness, his unwavering devotion to tradition. Words would not be enough. Her gaze hardened. You will not touch him. The challenge hung in the air, heavy and immutable. For a Kithen to defy the orders of an elder council representative was nearly unthinkable. To do so in defense of an outworlder was treason. Vorl and the other warrior shifted their stances, their spears now angled toward Xylia as well. So be it, Kale said, his voice laced with regret. You have chosen to side with the God-Eater, you share its taint. He lunged. Kale was fast, his movements honed by a lifetime of hunting. But Xylia had always been faster. She parried his spear thrust with the haft of her own, the impact sending a jarring shock through her arms. The clearing erupted into a maelstrom of motion. Vorl and the other warrior moved to flank her, to get to Caleb. Caleb did not stay passive. He ducked low as Vorl's spear swept over his head, the glowing crystal sizzling the air where his neck had been. He rolled, coming up with a heavy rock in his hand. He hurled it not at the warrior but at his feet, forcing Vorl to stumble and break his charge. It was a simple, effective tactic, the move of a thinker, not just a fighter. Xylia used the opening. She spun, her secondary arms grabbing Vorl's spear shaft, using his own momentum to twist him off balance. With her primary arms, she slammed the butt of her spear into the warrior's chest plate, the blow hard enough to stagger him but not to cause serious injury. She was defending, not attacking. She was trying to subdue, not kill, but Kale was relentless. He pressed his attack on her, his spear a blur of golden light, each thrust aimed with deadly precision. Why, Xylia? He grunted, their weapons locking. Why do you defend this thing that spits on everything we are? Because you are wrong, she cried out, forcing him back. Strength is not just in claws and chitin. There are other ways. Even as she fought, a part of her mind registered a new sound, a low, rhythmic thudding that was growing steadily louder. It was a sound that did not belong to the jungle, a heavy, earth-shaking beat that made the ground beneath her feet tremble. All four of them, Xylia, Kale, Vorl, and the other warrior, paused for a fraction of a second, their hunter's instincts screaming a new alarm. Caleb had heard it too. He was looking past them into the deep jungle, his eyes wide with a different kind of fear. Oh no, he breathed, the words lost in the growing noise. Not now. From the shadows of the colossal fungi it emerged. It was not one creature but a stampede. A herd of titan beetles, massive, six-legged beasts armored in thick, stony plates, each one the size of a Kithen dwelling. They were typically placid herbivores, but when spooked, their stampedes were a force of nature that could level entire sections of the forest. And something had spooked them badly. They were charging blindly, their huge, multifaceted eyes glazed with panic, their thundering legs crushing everything in their path. The conflict in the clearing was instantly rendered insignificant. The Kithen spears, so deadly moments before, were like needles against the armored hides of the charging behemoths. "Scatter!" Kale yelled, his authority reasserting itself in the face of a greater threat. But it was too late. The herd was upon them, a moving wall of destruction. Xylia grabbed Caleb's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "This way!" She pulled him toward a narrow ravine at the edge of the clearing, the only potential shelter. Kale and his warriors were not far behind, their squabble forgotten in the face of annihilation. A juvenile titan beetle, separated from the main herd, swerved toward them, its massive mandibles clashing together like grinding stones. Kale braced himself, ready to sell his life dearly. But Caleb was already moving. He shoved Xylia toward the ravine. "Get down!" he shouted, and then he turned to face the charging beast. He unhooked the plasma cutter from his belt. It was not a weapon designed for range. He had to get close. It was an insane, suicidal move. Xylia watched in horror as he ran toward the behemoth. He dodged its first clumsy strike, the creature's leg smashing the ground where he had been standing. He slid in the mud beneath its armored underbelly, a place no Kithen hunter would ever dare to go. He jammed the tip of the cutter against the softer chitin, where the leg joined the torso, and pulled the trigger. A beam of pure, white-hot energy, no thicker than his thumb, lanced out. It sliced through the joint with a horrific, searing hiss. The titan beetle shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and its leg buckled. The massive creature crashed to the ground, its momentum carrying it into a pile of rocks just short of the ravine where the Kithyn were taking cover. Its writhing, dying body formed an inadvertent barricade, diverting the rest of the stampeding herd around them. The thunder of the stampede faded into the distance, leaving behind a ringing silence, broken only by the pained groans of the dying beetle. Xylia, Kale, and the other two Kithyn stared, their breathing ragged. They looked at the fallen giant, then at the small, soft-skinned creature who was now climbing out from under it, covered in mud and steaming alien blood. He had not used a spear or a claw. He had used a tool of fire and light, a piece of impossible technology, with a kind of reckless, tactical bravery that was utterly foreign to them. Kale slowly lowered his spear. He looked at Caleb, and for the first time the contempt in his eyes was replaced by a profound, unnerving respect. He then looked at Xylia, and in his gaze she saw the dawning of a terrible, world-altering understanding. She had not been wrong. Strength came in many forms, and they had just witnessed a form of strength they had never imagined. The God-Eater was a survivor, and perhaps he was more than that. He was a weapon. The aftermath of the stampede left the clearing in a state of stunned silence. The air was thick with the smell of churned earth and the coppery tang of the fallen Titan beetle's hemolymph. Kale stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Caleb, who was checking his plasma cutter with a grim expression. The tool was sparking, its casing cracked from the impact of the beetle's fall. It was likely useless now. Vorl and the other warrior helped each other up, their bodies bruised but intact. Their earlier aggression had evaporated, replaced by a wide-eyed wariness. They looked at Caleb not as a scavenger, but as a shaman of some terrifying, unknowable school of magic. Xylia was the first to move. She walked over to Caleb, her secondary arms reaching out to steady him as he stumbled slightly. He looked up at her, a weary but grateful smile touching his lips. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She gave a short, affirmative click of her mandibles. Her hand rested on his shoulder for a moment longer than necessary, the feel of his strange, tough clothing a solid presence under her palm. In that moment, a profound shift occurred within her. The complex mixture of fear, respect, and fascination coalesced into a single, undeniable feeling, a powerful, protective attraction. He was not just a curiosity anymore. He was Caleb, and she had stood against her own kind for him. Kale finally walked toward them, his steps heavy. He stopped before Caleb and Xylia, his gaze long and searching. He did not raise his weapon. "Your companion," Kale began, his voice raspy, directed at Xylia but his eyes on Caleb, "fights with a strange and terrible power. He saved us. He saved my warriors. A debt of life is owed." Xylia translated the sentiment with a gesture, touching her own chest and then sweeping her hand out to include Kale's party, before pointing to Caleb and making a motion of gratitude. Caleb nodded, accepting the gesture. He looked at Kale, his expression one of a fellow survivor, not a victor. He offered his hand, an instinctive human gesture of peace. Kale stared at the offered hand, a soft, five-fingered appendage, so unlike his own clawed, three-fingered one. After a long hesitation, he reached out and clasped Caleb's forearm, the Kithyn equivalent of a warrior's pact. The cultural gap was bridged by the universal language of mutual survival. "He cannot stay here alone," Kale stated, looking at Xylia. "The jungle will kill him, if not by fang then by fever. And his presence has broken the balance. The story of the Cathar, the stampede, it will spread. Others will come, not as understanding as I now am. They will see him as a threat to be eliminated." Xylia knew he was right. Caleb's secret was out. "What do you propose?" she asked. "He comes with us," Kale said, the decision costing him a visible measure of his pride. "He will be brought before the Elder Council. We will tell them what we saw, both the desecration and the salvation. They will decide his fate. It is the only way to ensure he lives to see another cycle, and the only way to protect our clan from the chaos he brings." It was a dangerous gamble. The Elder Council was even more steeped in tradition than Kale. They might see Caleb's actions as proof of his danger, not his worth. But it was a better chance than leaving him here, a target for fearful hunters or the unforgiving wilderness. Xylia turned to Caleb. This would be the hardest part to explain. She pointed to Kale and his warriors, then to herself. Then she made a walking motion with her fingers, leading away from the clearing. She pointed at him and then beckoned him to join the walk. She tried to convey a sense of a group, of a community. She pointed to the dead Titan beetle, then to the sky, trying to explain that his power was too great to be left alone, that it had consequences. Caleb watched her gestures intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He understood the core of it. They wanted him to go with them. He looked at the smoking ruin of his cutter. His best tool, his only real defense, was gone. His chances of long-term survival on his own had just plummeted. He looked at Xylia's earnest, multifaceted eyes. He had seen her defy her own people for him. He trusted her. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. The journey to the Kithen Warren was a tense affair. Caleb was a strange, soft figure amidst the hard-shelled, four-armed aliens. He walked with an easy, ground-covering stride that ate up the distance, earning a measure of respect from the warriors for his stamina. Xylia stayed close to him, a silent guardian and interpreter. She would point out dangerous flora, and he would watch and learn. He, in turn, showed her how to use a strip of cloth as a tourniquet when Vorl reopened a cut on his leg, a piece of simple medical knowledge the Kithen, with their rapid-healing exoskeletons, had never needed. Small exchanges, but each one wove the threads of their connection tighter. When they arrived at the Warren, a vast, bioengineered network of tunnels and chambers built into the roots of a mountain-sized fungus, their appearance caused an immediate uproar. Kithen of all ages and roles poured out of the entrances, their mandibles clicking in shock and alarm. The sight of the outworlder, the ghost of the jungle, walking amongst their finest hunters, was a scandal. The Elder Council convened in the great chamber, a vast cavern illuminated by glowing mosses and the resonant hum of a massive power crystal. Caleb stood in the center, with Xylia at his side, surrounded by the stern, ancient faces of the clan's leaders. Kale spoke first. He recounted the events with unflinching honesty. He described the horror of the Cathar's butchered corpse, the shock of Xylia's defiance, and the undeniable, terrifying power and bravery Caleb displayed during the stampede. He ended his account by laying his own spear at the feet of the council. "I cannot judge this being," he declared. "My senses are in conflict. I have seen both blasphemy and honor in him. The debt of my life and the lives of my hunters is owed to him. I ask the council for its wisdom." A heated debate erupted. Some elders called for Caleb's immediate execution, branding him a corrupting influence, a harbinger of doom. Others, swayed by Kale's testimony, argued for caution. He was a source of great power and knowledge. Perhaps he could be an asset. Finally, the eldest, a withered Kithen whose chitin was pale with age, silenced the chamber. She turned her ancient, clouded eyes on Xylia. "First Huntress," her voice was like the rustle of dry leaves. "You stood against your clan for this, Skyfaller, you who have always embodied our ways more purely than any other. You must explain your heart." "Why?" Xylia stepped forward. Her gaze swept over the council, her clan. She felt Caleb's presence behind her, calm and steady. She had been a huntress her whole life, defined by tradition, by the hunt, by the laws of her world. But meeting Caleb had shown her that the world was infinitely larger than she had ever known. "I stood for him because what I saw was not blight," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I saw a hunter like us, but his jungle is the empty cold between the stars. His prey is survival itself. He did not kill the Cathar with malice, but with desperation. He ate it not with arrogance, but with the pragmatism of one who knows what it is to have nothing. His strength is not of the body, but of the mind. It is a strength we have never seen, and because we have not seen it, we fear it. We are right to be cautious, but we are wrong to be blind." She turned and looked at Caleb, a silent communication passing between them. "He is not a monster, he is a person, he is alone, and we are Kithen. We do not prey on the weak or the solitary, we are hunters, and the greatest hunt is not for trophies but for understanding." Her words settled over the chamber, a profound and unexpected truth. The debate was over. The eldest looked at Caleb, then at Xylia, and a slow understanding dawned in her ancient eyes. The world had changed. A being had fallen from the sky and in his fight for survival had held up a mirror to their own traditions, forcing them to see themselves in a new light. The council did not decide on execution or welcome. They chose a third path, containment and observation. Caleb would live among them, a guest and a prisoner, until they could determine the nature of his being and the threat or promise he represented. Later in the chamber assigned to him, Xylia brought Caleb food, roasted tubers and steamed fungi, a meal she had prepared herself. He sat on a woven mat, examining the strange, organic curves of the Kithan architecture. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft in the quiet of the room. Xylia nodded, understanding the tone if not the word. She sat across from him, the space between them filled with 1,000 unspoken questions. Their futures were intertwined now, a thread of destiny woven in a clearing over the body of a fallen god. The fear was not gone, not entirely. He was still a being of immense, casual power from an unknown world. The respect had only deepened, forged in the crucible of combat and survival. And the attraction, it was now a quiet, steady warmth in her chest, a pull toward this impossible, intelligent, resilient man who had shattered her world, and then, against all odds, helped her save a piece of it. He offered her a piece of the roasted tuber. She accepted. As they shared the simple meal, Xylia looked at Caleb, the god-eater, the survivor, the outworlder. She no longer saw a monster or a myth. She saw a partner. And she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that the hunt for understanding had only just begun.